Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name's Frederick Weller and today I want to talk about high level and epic level games. And this is from the perspective of the Dungeon Master rather than the player. Now the first thing to realise is that most players actually like to play at high level. It's just not very much fun for the Dungeon Master. The first jump in power occurs at level 5 and then from there on the next one would be about level 8 to 10. And it just gets worse from there on. The advice for this particular video will focus on level 10 upward. How do you actually challenge powerful high level characters? Well, the first thing, don't use combat to challenge them. They have far too many powerful abilities, feats and spells available now. They are near unstoppable and they can combine those abilities with other characters and have synergies that are just unbelievable. And when you try to actually make a challenging combat for a high level character, the time frame gets longer and longer and longer. I have had combats that have lasted 2 or 3 hours, just as you would see in say 3rd or 4th edition. So it's not very much fun. It's perfectly fine to run very easy combat for your high level characters, and I'll tell you why. They are powerful and they should feel powerful. The only thing is you want to try to make sure that your combat lasts for at least 1 round. That way everybody actually gets a turn before the combat finishes. Challenge your players' characters with difficult puzzles and lethal traps. Present them with problems to solve that are near impossible, that can't be resolved by combat. Now if you're going to use puzzles in your game, try not to use puzzles with a group that don't like puzzles. If you're going to present lethal traps, make them lethal. They don't have to wipe out the entire party, but they can be lethal enough that they take down a player's character or in fact kill them. And then when I say present near impossible problems to solve, I don't mean puzzles. What I mean is present them with a situation so difficult that just fighting their way straight into that location or where combat is just not feasible. Whether that is to break into a castle fortified by an army, whether that is to delve into the centre of the world, something that really is beyond their ability to simply use magic and blast things or use a sword or a bow and take things out by killing it. Give your villains artifacts, powerful artifacts, artifacts so powerful that they change the balance of power between the player's characters and the villain. Things that can really generate lots of trouble, particularly for an epic character. And I'm talking about things that open up other worlds, open portals, create things or generate effects that really they can't deal with without doing something really important. Whether that is to collect a number of items together, whether that is to perform some magical ritual, something that actually forces them to go out of the norm, where it isn't just a matter of, okay, they have this artifact, let's just go and attack them. You're presenting them with things that are well beyond their normal capacity. Skill challenges can be very, very helpful. They came from the Dungeons and Dragons 4E game, the skill challenge, and really all they are a selection of skill checks or ability checks in a series that you perform to complete a task. Now I've used this many times. I've used it for an avalanche where a number of checks were required to avoid being basically buried by an avalanche. I've also used it to try and escape from a giant worm. Now if you've played the Dune game or read the book Dune or watched the movie, you'll know that there's giant worms in that particular story, and there's the story of how they produce the spice, but they're also quite dangerous. You've got to be careful. They swallow things up. They're large enough that they can swallow anything quite easily. And I put this into one of my games, my Dark Sun game. And this whole series of skill checks that I put together was a skill challenge, and it's about running away from or trying to escape from this giant sandworm. Which they did in my game, fortunately, but it generated a lot of interest. There's lots of different things they could do. I presented in a way where I knew that there had to be a series of checks they need to perform, and they needed to perform a certain number of checks to be successful. and if they didn't, then something bad happened. Now this takes the focus away from combat and moves it more towards your high level character or the epic level character. Their skills are now more important, and also their brain and how they're using those skills to try to figure out how to solve their problems. And that can be very, very helpful, and also really quite entertaining for the Dungeon Master and the player. Planar travel presents environments that even an epic level character will have trouble surviving in. So take them to the fire plane. They're not going to be resistant to fire, and they're certainly not going to be immune to fire, so that will present a lot of problems for them. You can take them to the Nine Hells. Now that has extremes on both sides, yet again an environment that is very difficult to survive in. Another example is the Astral Sea. Very easy to get to, provided you have the right spells and the right sort of craft, but you are still going to find it difficult to survive in the open expanse of the Astral Sea. The Far Realm is another example, and this is a different type of threat. This threat is going mad or being transformed into some sort of monstrosity, and the very world of the Far Realm is completely unknown, so this is a world that potentially will try to eat them. It's at this point your characters in your game, if they are playing at really high level or even epic level, are, they're in the range of 10 right up to maybe even to 20. Now I have my own group that are ranged now at about 17, and it's time for them to start facing the big boys and girls. That means they're facing gods, because they are almost godlike in themselves. So have them face Tiamat. It's time to face Tiamat. Why not? It's time to face Orcus. Why not? Now Orcus has a wand that can literally kill a character, so you are now presenting them with a lot of different and much more impressive villains to deal with. They are heading into legend, and it's at this point you need to start thinking about stories for each of the characters that sort of bring them to the pinnacle of their career. They are, if they're not going to die, then they need to have something they have done that sort of indicates they are legendary. Whether they retire somewhere and become a king or a queen, or whether they become a lord, or maybe they transcend and actually become a god themselves. There is a point where your campaign and the characters, you need to start thinking about how they will be retired. Do you retire the campaign? Do you retire characters? There is a point where things do actually come to an end. One of the things you need to avoid doing is using a solo monster or villain, because they are simply too easy for the party to overwhelm, particularly if it lands and they are in melee. I would always recommend that you use minions. So if you have a solo creature, make sure that you use minions, things that can soak up and distract the player's characters so that they're not focusing on the main villain or your main monster. The other thing is you need to try to use tactics, smarter tactics at higher level. Now that's really difficult to actually implement, because you've only got one brain and you're contending with between 4 and 6 brains at your table. And if you're unlucky, you'll have power gamers there, and you really can't compete with that. But things like dragons. Now dragons should really never fly down into melee range. They don't land. They should be flying over a breath weapon. Now if you don't have a breath weapon available, then you're waiting for it to recharge, and flying around they're going to get shot at. So as soon as they sort of hit a point where they've got half their hit points, it's time to fly away. Okay, if they don't recharge their breath weapon and you still want to engage the player characters, you can do that. They have multiple attacks, so use them. You don't actually have to make attacks on the ground. Fly by, and instead of using one of their attacks to actually make a bite attack or a claw attack, you can do something like grapple them, making a grapple. Grapple them, fly off with them, take them up to 200 feet and drop them. Okay, that presents you with more options available, and it keeps them out of the danger zone by flying them down where they can be struck. Really, one of the more important things is when you get a legendary creature, if they have legendary actions, then use the legendary actions, provided that they don't put the creature at huge risk. sometimes putting a dragon up close so you can use those legendary actions won't actually work very well. If they have a lair action, make sure you're using the lair actions, because that actually increases the risk to the player's characters and makes the game more interesting, particularly at high level. Other things that you will find is that your monsters work best if you understand how they work, and sometimes it's important to actually see what other dungeon masters are doing. So if you don't understand how the tactics for your monsters will actually work really, really well with your players in a party, then watch what somebody else is doing. Consider ignoring the Dungeon Master's Guide encounter building rules. It's on page 81 to 84, but they break down. The maths doesn't work after a certain point. So I want you to consider doubling or even tripling the challenge rating for your encounters. Now I know what you're thinking. What happens? I'm going to wind up killing off my player characters, or I'm going to have a total party kill, and that's going to create problems for me. Well, have a little faith, because you'll find as you play the game that they will have no trouble with high level monsters. They really will be able to manage them. And I've found in my own games that they can take a lot of punishment, particularly at level 5, it really starts there. And then from about level 8 to 10, there really isn't too much that can stop them. You might have a few character deaths, but it's very unlikely that you'll have a total party kill. Now, with the rise of Tiamat being an example here, you can throw an army at your party. There's nothing wrong with doing that. You can have waves of monsters or NPCs attacking the party, and that will slowly whittle down their power and their resources, which is a good thing. But don't expect to be able to overwhelm your party with waves or even large numbers of monsters, because I've tried this myself and it doesn't actually work. I had 400 Oryx attack a level 16 party, and they dealt with it with no real problem. Now that sounds bad, but it still presents them with an interesting encounter. It's a combat encounter again, so it runs into the problem of running really, really long. But yes, just remember that trying to overwhelm your party with numbers sometimes will not actually work. I've done this with ogres, I've even done it with giants. You just need to change the tactics of your monsters. Overwhelming them is sometimes actually very, very difficult to do. Primarily because fighters can take a punishment. They have a lot of hit points, they have a high AC, they can stack other things on top of them. What's worse is if you have to deal with somebody like a paladin or even a barbarian. A barbarian loves damage. Their damage resistance is just so impressive. Taking down a barbarian, very, very difficult. Now sorcerers and wizards and anything that can cast fly or levitate or teleport, they're going to be very hard to actually get at. They're going to be doing everything from range, because they're probably going to be flying around or floating around. Anything that can cast invisibility is going to cause you trouble. And if there are party members amongst your group that can actually be vulnerable to a swarm or hordes of orcs or monsters of some kind, they are probably going to get polymorph cast on them so that they transform into a T-Rex or a giant ape, so that they've got extra hit points to soak up that damage. Now this is really, really key to running any kind of combat for a high level group or an epic level group, and that is when you present the combat to them, make sure that it is not about just killing monsters or NPCs. Make sure there is an objective that they have to actually complete. Maybe they have to save some villages, stop some sort of ritual from occurring. Maybe they have to protect something. Recently I had my group play out a battle between the Alliance and the Cult of the Dragon. And when I did this, I used the trebuchet. They had a couple of trebuchet, there was a line of trebuchet, and they had to protect them because the evil chromatic dragons were coming in and they were going to destroy the artillery units. And so they had to protect them, and actually they failed that completely. They didn't die. Most of the troops around the trebuchet perished in the flames. The trebuchet burnt to a crisp. They didn't die, and it actually presents them with a whole lot of problems, because they start to realize as players that their characters are going to live through all of this, but everybody around them is going to die. And now they have other problems to deal with. It's not just about killing something. They actually have to complete an objective while fighting off whatever it is trying to attack them or destroy something. Changes the balance of power. It is probably the most useful tool that you will have at high level. Another thing that you can actually do is pick on one of the player characters during your combat, if you're going to run a combat, and that way you can actually scare a player much more than you can scare a party. You're probably not going to be able to affect the party's demeanour very much, but if you level and focus fire on one player character, you'll probably take them down, potentially kill that character. You don't want to kill a character, but you can take them down, and that will scare them a little bit. That's much easier to do than actually scaring the party or challenging them. So you change the way that you present your encounters by just picking on one. Now the thing is, you don't want to do that to the same player every single week. So each session, try to pick somebody else so that they don't sort of think that you are being unreasonable and that they have a beef with you. Create monsters that do massive damage in just one blow. I've done this many times myself. You can use the monster manual if you like, or you can use the Dungeon Master Guide. On page 274 there is a chart and it explains how to create a quick monster stat. Now if I have a party of say level 8 characters and I want to challenge them, I would probably at least double the power of my monster. So if it's going to go double, I want something that's sort of like a challenge rating 16. So I look along, challenge rating 16, and it tells me what the armor class is, it tells me how many hit points, and it also tells me roughly what its attack bonus will be. So in this case it would be a +9, and I would roll my d20, make my attack, and then it would output 99 to 104 hit points of damage. Now there might be piercing, biting, or whatever it is that you want. You create the monster, you figure that out, but that will scare your players. Now they're still going to wind up, once they get their turn, having between 4 and 5 player characters, maybe even more, wailing on the creature, and they might probably just kill it in the next round, but that doesn't matter. You have at least scared them. You'll probably knock one down or certainly seriously injure one of your player characters. I've done this many times myself. I've done this with a monstrous spider, a giant rabbit. I created a rancor for my players. I did this same sort of process, and I suggest that you do the same thing because it works really, really well. Restrict the ability to take short and long rests during an adventure, particularly if they are assaulting or dealing with fortified locations like a castle, a fort, anything that would have patrols running through it. This means that they can't rest for an hour because they will be found by a patrol, and certainly taking a long rest will probably be impossible because they're not going to have overwhelming forces try to assault them. That also reduces their resources slowly but surely, and they'll have fewer spells, fewer abilities are going to recharge because they won't be able to take a short rest or a long rest, and they'll start to realize I'm going to have to start thinking smart. It increases the risk to them. They might use teleport or plane shift to escape. That's all fine, but it does change the dynamic for them by removing the ability to rest. The last thing I want to say about high level games or epic level characters in your game and how to actually deal with them is stop worrying about character death. Your players' characters have a lot of resources now available to them. Revivify, Raise Dead, Reincarnate, True Resurrection, Wish spells, they're going to have all of that stuff available at some point. So character death isn't going to be something that they can't resolve. They can deal with that. So don't worry about it. Kill their characters and let them figure out how to move on. I don't want to turn this into a talk about whether you should have character death in your adventure or whether you should not have it in your adventure. You know, the do's and don'ts about it are unimportant. What I will say is challenging your players' characters, and particularly your players, there's nothing wrong with using things that are overpowered that they can't manage. Character death is something they can deal with. They are strong enough for that. Okay, that's everything that I have on high level and epic level play. Now, if you found this video informative or helpful, please share, like and subscribe. Make a comment below if you have played in a high level game and what your experience was. It's always interesting to hear what people have to say. And until next time, keep rolling those 20s.